Welcome to the Expanding Worlds podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Caldo. And welcome to another episode in the Financial Future series. One of the things I wanted to do with this series was to find resources and identify tools people could use to build financial security. And it doesn't really matter where those ideas come from, because even those things we can't directly use ourselves can give us some new ideas to make us aware of what other options might be worth thinking about. So in this episode, I'm talking about something that will only be directly relevant if you live in the US, because I'm talking with Jill Cornfield, an experienced personal finance journalist, about able accounts. But having said all that, I can assure you that a lot of what we discuss in this episode is useful even if you're not able to access able accounts. Of course, I can't guarantee you won't have a large dose of FOMO, as I did, if you're not US-based. But Jill and I talk about wider issues around things like saving and researching and doing safe things, which end up not always being the best things. But if able accounts are an option, then lucky you, because they really do address some of the key issues that our young people have, especially around inclusion and the right to do things that everyone else does, like save to buy things they need or even save up to buy their own home. Before we get into this episode, I wanted to quickly remind you as well about Graham Caldo's new book, What's Possible? Plan a Better Future for Your Young Adult with Additional Needs. This book is about his journey. It's about our journey. It's also about the things that we've learned through working on this podcast together. And it's available on Amazon and other online bookstores. This podcast was started to share ideas and share solutions, regardless of location, because listening to new ideas, even the ones that we may never be able to use, helps us learn to think about things differently. And I think this episode is a great example of this. So enough from me. Let's hear about able accounts from Jill. Thank you very much, Jill, for joining me today. Can we start off by you telling me a little bit about yourself and what exactly you do?
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Deborah. So I am a personal finance journalist. Until recently, I was the deputy editor of Money.com, which is a well-respected personal finance brand in the U.S. Before that, I was with Investopedia, which is another personal finance site. And what happened was, really, I spent my whole professional career doing arts and features, and I did a lot of food writing and fun things, and I was never going to write about money, which is boring and nobody cares about. I wouldn't find that interesting. And then the recession came and my husband's magazine folded. He was also in financial journalism. And somebody in that company said, we need a copy editor. And I was like, I'll do it. I love to find mistakes. So I went for an interview with an American banker thinking, this is going to be very dull. But it was the recession. It was like the most interesting job I've ever had. It was a great newsroom. Banks were toppling right and left, which was fascinating. Maybe some of your audience will know, but Elizabeth Warren came on the scene. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was formed. For financial information in this country, it was just a great time. So I thought, okay, so maybe I do like money and finance. So I took a job in retirement, a retirement business-facing publication, and it was very interesting. I learned a lot about retirement, but at some point I thought, I would love to do personal finance, things that people care about, not companies and business people. So I went into personal finance and it was great. I was really glad to be able to help people and learn a lot about how financial things work in this country, which is complicated and confusing.
So I found you because I was looking for someone to talk about able accounts. So can we start off by talking about able accounts and what exactly they are?
So it's funny, in 2012, when I started my financial career, able accounts didn't exist. They came in 2014. I really only had the dimmest notion of them, which is funny because I have a disabled son. My older son was born very premature. He was small. He was in the hospital a long time, and he has autism. And he needs a lot of support, though he's a young man who loves life. So able accounts were created in 2014, and they are based on a tax code. For years, we've had something called a 529 account. That's the tax code. It's the tax code 529. And this allows you to save for college or education in a somewhat tax-advantaged way. You can stash a certain limit every year. It changes, generally goes up. You don't have to pay income tax on that. So in 2014, a man named Chip Gerhardt, who has a daughter with Down syndrome, was the one who helped spearhead able accounts, which is the same tax code. So it's a 529-A for able account. And able account stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. So what the 529 ABLE account allows someone to do is save for their whatever expenses they might have, whether it's a home or a special trip they want to take, or even daily living. I mean, you can use an ABLE account for groceries and rent and mortgage and things like that. It's very liberal how you can use the account.
So basically it was brought in to give people who have additional needs the opportunity to save.
Exactly. Without affecting any government benefits they would get. So that's the key. The other thing I wanted to say about ABLE accounts and their creation is that they're very nimble and easy to set up, which is something I like very much. So as a 529, which is like the college ones, it's a state-based program. You can use the one in your state, but you don't have to. You can open up an ABLE account in any state that has that program. You can only have one for the beneficiary. You cannot have more than one. You are limited to that yearly limit, which this year is $17,000. Last year was $16,000. The other thing I wanted to say is originally they were set up for people who had some disability, but the onset had to be before age 26. Now, late last year, they changed it, and the limit is now age 46, which practically doubles the eligible user base. So that's a great thing, because honestly, when you think of people who have sustained some kind of life-threatening injury, whatever it is, after age 26, they should still be able to save for a house or save for something that they need and want.
So the way it works, you can put a maximum of $17,000 in each year.
Actually, you can put in more. If the beneficiary is working in whatever capacity, the limit is higher. So there's a bit more that you can save if you're actually earning a salary.
So you said it's different across the different state, or you can go to different states and do it. Do they have different rules around it as well?
No, the rules are really very similar state to state. It's always going to be a $17,000 limit. It's always going to be if you earn a salary, you can save that much more. Where it does vary is in how much you can accumulate in the account, because you cannot accumulate millions. You can only accumulate up to a certain level, and it's variable. It's a few hundred thousand with some variation, not much. But the real difference in the state programs is that generally a state has one program only. I don't know if any state has two. They might. I'm just going to say might because I don't know. Where they vary is they're administered by different financial services providers. We live in New York. Our son is also in New York. We chose the Massachusetts program because Fidelity is the financial provider. I really like Fidelity. We already have an account with them, so it's easy to have it there. And their fees are very low. Other states have somewhat higher fees. They have different investments. So it's really like choosing a bank account. One bank account is going to have certain advantages that suit you, and another bank, may have something different. You're almost like choosing a bank. So to me, the great thing about the ABLE account is that it allows you to invest the money so that you can make money on it. I don't know. We probably have gained about 1,000 or so in compounding since we started it.
And it has no effect on state benefits or any...
Correct. I mean, it would if it got to something like, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I wrote one story about ABLE accounts in which a young married couple with a disability was saving for a home. And this was just a wonderful achievement. I mean, the sad thing about the limit on benefits is, one, it has not changed in decades, many, many decades. Inflation, nothing has changed that benefit. So it's ridiculous to have this incredibly low ceiling amount of assets you can have. The second thing is it forced people to do stupid things with money. I mean, they had to. Someone said, well, I went out and I spent $100 on socks. I went out and I bought a bunch of DVDs. Nothing wrong with buying DVDs or socks, but to be forced to buy more of those things than you want or need is silly.
To bring themselves below the threshold that they couldn't...
Right, because you're running in danger of reaching that cap. So you think, well, I'll just spend the money down.
There's absolutely no logic to that, is there? In terms of how people spend the money, you mentioned your example of someone buying a house. Do you think that's what people are sort of saving for more long-term things? Or do more people use it? Just from your experience.
Honestly, I can't say, because there's such a huge variation in people's backgrounds, needs, and disabilities. I mean, I spoke to a young man who was injured in a hit-and-run accident. He was biking to his job in high school. He was hit by a car. He's wheelchair-bound now. He is able to work. He wanted a wheelchair-accessible van. That's a huge expense. If you have a $2,000 limit on your assets, you're never going to get there. Yeah, people use them for home modifications. That's a popular one.
Who can put money into the ABLE account?
If the beneficiary is working and can put the money in, that's fine. But family members and friends can contribute if they like. Just like grandparents will often fund a grandchild's 529 college account, you can fund your family member's ABLE account.
One of the things that was in your article that I found really interesting was you were talking about the low take-up And I don't know if that's still the case, because obviously it was probably a couple of years ago, the article that I found.
Yeah, so in fact, I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but in fact, uptake has increased every year. There's a company that tracks how much money is coming into Able accounts every year. I think it has hit $1 billion now, whereas for a while it was sort of struggling to be in the millions. Obviously, college accounts, the 529 college accounts, have in aggregate have trillions of dollars. But Able accounts haven't been around as long, and you also have fewer families using them.
Do you think it's a lack of awareness, or is it a lack of understanding, a worry about putting too much money into one account?
I think it's all of those things. I've been in touch with special needs parents of adult children. I mean, I would say the biggest drawback with Able accounts in most people's eyes is that Medicaid can claim leftover benefits after the beneficiary dies. First, I want to say not all states have that, although most do. I also want to say that there are special needs trusts that can also do that. So you have to be very careful if you're setting up a special needs trust that you don't have the kind where the benefits can be withdrawn by Medicaid.
Kind of leads me on to the next question, which was about research. And do you think people sort of, from your experience in finance, people just don't do enough research and think that's what I've heard about and I'm going to stay with that?
I do think that. My job has basically been to learn about personal finance things, learn about banking, learn about investing, learn about retirement, learn about Medicare, just learn about all these things. And they are massively complicated. My fantasy is always that people in other countries have it so much easier and so much better. You're laughing because it's not true. I know that. But American life financially, it's complicated. So yeah, I think people get a hold of an idea, feel good that they have understood something, but then they don't dig in because it's a lot of work and life is stressful and people have a lot going on. So I don't want to criticize anyone who doesn't know that much about Ables, but I guess I would want to say, look, you'll lose nothing by learning more about them. Just dig in and find out as much as you can and find out that, maybe they would work for you and your family. To me, the biggest advantage of Able accounts, aside from how liberal the use of the money is how easy and cheap they are to set up. You don't need a lawyer. You don't need a financial advisor of any kind. You go to the Able National Resource site. You look at their comparison tool. You plug in. You compare as much as you like. You can even call them and talk to them and see what's going to work for you. There's no fee in setting that up, which I really love. Whereas special needs trust, you're going to need to see a lawyer. You're going to, need to have expensive consultation sessions. It's not cheap.
Could that also be a barrier, the fact that you as the parent or the guardian will do more of the work? Because when you do something like a special needs trust, you can sort of go, right, I'm going to use a professional. When I talk about finance, I say, I'm not a professional. I'll just talk about what I've done. And you can talk about what you've done, and you've obviously got some professional qualifications around it. But do you think people would rather just sort of push it off, and maybe something like Able just sounds too good to be true?
It's complicated. I think you're right that people would rather, some people are more do it for me than do it yourself. And there's definitely that. The fact is, it's not that hard to do it. People sometimes shy away from something where they have to do it, but you don't really have to do that. So I think people are maybe, you don't know what you don't know.
I think as well, you mentioned it there, it's unfair to sort of say someone hasn't done the research, because as a parent of a young person with additional needs, it can be hard work. It can be hard getting everything. You're dealing with a lot of other stuff going on. And the finance side, which is why I want to do a series on finance, because I know that it's something that a lot of people just kind of push aside and go, well, I won't worry about that. But in fact, that's the biggest thing for their future, really, isn't it? When we're not around, which is, I think, the other thing you've got to think about when you're not around, and people don't like to do that either.
It's true. I know a lot of special needs parents who still have their adult child living at home. A lot of people who have kids at home living in their 20s and 30s, and I'm just like, okay, our son is so acclimated now to living away from us. We visit him almost every weekend. When we take him back to his group home, he's like, okay, bye.
Yeah, that seems to be a common theme, doesn't it? That we hold on to them a bit too long. Because it's fear as well, isn't it? It's worry, and it's.
I don't want to judge anyone else's situation. I know people are afraid, but I have heard stories and seen situations where if an adult child has not found a way to live on his or her own, it can be so traumatic when in fact the parent is gone. So I just didn't ever want to have that happen with our son. So hard to think about the future, and it's complicated. There's a lot going on, and frankly, the day-to-day life of a special needs parent's life is not the easiest one.
No, and as I say, that might be thinking about the Able account. It is one of those things where you do have to do the research. You do have to think about it, and like you said, you have to be actively involved. From what you say and from what I've read, it's a fantastic kind of account that enables people to have so much more independence. I mean, I've not heard of anything like the Able account anywhere else in the world, so I think it's quite unique, whoever came up with it was a little bit more forward thinking in terms of making sure that people had the ability to be independent, because it never ceases to amaze me that governments, wherever they are, can't see forward enough to think, actually, if we enable people to do more for themselves, if we enable people to have their own money, if we enable them to work, they won't be dependent on the state. That one thing just amazes me every time I speak to someone who talks about something like this. So
Yeah.
in terms of planning ahead, as a professional talking to people about personal finance, you give me a couple of things that people should be thinking about. And as a parent or guardian of a young person with additional needs, what should people be doing? And I know it's a big question. I'm not expecting a perfect answer, but just some ideas to sort of help people, not just the ABLE accounts, but just in general.
Yeah, I would say the first thing is don't be afraid of learning about different kinds of accounts and financial things. It's not as complicated or as hard as you think. I've known many, many people in finance over the last 10, 15 years. And look, they're not all geniuses. They're smart and they're hardworking, but they are not rocket scientists. The second thing is about ABLE accounts. There's the do it for me or I'll do it myself. Whenever you do it yourself, it's going to be cheaper. Whenever you hand it off to someone, a lawyer or a financial advisor, you're going to pay more, because someone's hands are touching it and they're working for you and your account. I'm not going to say one is better than the other, but there's nothing wrong with doing it yourself, and it's not that hard. Don't be afraid to learn more about this. It's like having a bank account and putting money in once a month. I think people should just research and learn how things work. There are also agencies. Sometimes if you work with a service organization, they will have some sort of pooled trust that you can participate in, and that's a lot cheaper and easier to do than going to a lawyer and having a special needs trust set up. I've heard people complain about ABLE accounts. Oh, they're expensive. Oh, there are fees. Every account that you put money into has fees. Nothing is free. I think people need to kind of get over a few misconceptions and quick reactions to ABLE accounts and special needs trusts, and just learn more about them to see what works for you. But honestly, I will say really clearly, I think every parent who has a child with special needs really needs to look at that child's future and see how it can be best managed and best prepared for. And if it needs to be saved for, then I hope people will try to find a way to save for it.
Hey, Jill, thank you very much for your time.
Deborah, thank you so much for having me. I love ABLE accounts and I love talking about them.
Thanks for listening. I hope you found out something new. And if you didn't know about ABLE accounts and you are able to access them, then it might be worth having a look and seeing if they might work for your young person. But there was more to this episode than just talking about one specific tool. It was also about putting in place strategies and planning ahead, because it does come back to that question, what happens when I'm no longer around? So the podcast will be taking a few weeks break now for the holiday season. So happy holidays, and I'll be back in January to finish off the Financial Future series. Of course, if you'd like to, you can contact me via email, deborah@expandingworlds.com, or you can connect with me online at Deborah Caldo.